So the next major update of Affinity Photo just got live. I actually just downloaded it myself, and of course if you are an existing customer, this update is completely free. So in this video I want to talk about the new features that Affinity Photo 1.9 offers. Let's go. Alright, so the first feature that I want to highlight is the linked layers. Now, how can this be useful and what are linked layers? So let me show you. I've got this example right over here. You can see I have three layers. I have the caterpillar right over here. Then I have my chameleon, and then I have the forest in the background. Now, how can we use linked layers? We can add any adjustment layer. So let's say we're gonna add a curves adjustment layer for whatever reason, and we're gonna play with the curves a little bit. So I'm gonna create an S curve, I'm gonna increase the highlights a little bit, and I'm gonna decrease the shadows to increase the contrast of the full image, let's say. Now what we can do is we can clip this to the chameleon, and now obviously this is only affecting the chameleon. Now we can create another curves layer, so I'm gonna press Command J. I'm gonna clip this one to the caterpillar, and now this also affects the caterpillar layer. Now these are not linked together, so this means that if I change either one, then it will only affect one of our layers. However, if I select one curves layer and I'm gonna click and drag the other curves layer to right over here, so this is my linked layers panel. Now you can see that this little icon appears, and now when I double click this layer, you can see that both of the layers are affected when I adjust my curves. Now you might ask, how do you get this panel? I mean, because this is of course a new panel in Affinity Photo, and you can access it by going to View, going to Studio, and then click on Links. And once you click on Links, you will see this little window. Now for every single layer, you'll find the ways that you can link your layer. So if I click on the caterpillar layer, this is an unlinked layer, let's say. You can see that I can link other layers to my caterpillar by linking the pixel content, the blending mode and ranges, the opacity and visibility, and the layer effects parameters. Let's say I want to apply some layer effects to my caterpillar layer, and let's actually decrease the background for now so we can see the caterpillar a bit better. So let's say we want to apply a Gaussian blur for whatever reason. So I'm gonna just blur the caterpillar, and now you can see that only this applies to the caterpillar. Now if I want this exact layer effects to be applied to my chameleon as well, what I can do with my caterpillar layer selected is I can drag my chameleon layer and I can clip it to the layer effects parameters. And once I do that, and I'm gonna apply a new Gaussian blur once again, you can see that both of my layers are affected by my layer effects. So we can also clip layers by opacity, by blending mode, and by pixel content. Now pixel content I'll get back to, but with opacity it's pretty easy. We can do the same thing. So with my caterpillar layer selected, I can drag my chameleon onto my opacity and visibility, and this basically means that if I reduce the opacity of either one, that both will be more transparent or more opaque. Now another way is the blending mode, so let me clip this once again to blending mode, and now if I change the blending mode, obviously both of my layers are changing the blending mode, which can be really powerful in certain situations. Now let me create a new caterpillar layer, but I don't just want to create a duplicate, I want to create a linked duplicate. So I select my caterpillar layer and I go up here to layer and go down a little bit and click on duplicate linked. So once I click on that, you can see that I have created a caterpillar layer, and this one is also linked to my other caterpillar layer. So now I can actually show you what the linked pixel content is. So let me drag this one to the side a little bit. And what this basically does is if I grab my eraser tool, so I click here or press E on the keyboard, you can see that once I erase a little bit of my caterpillar, it's gonna erase from both caterpillars at the same time because both are linked together. Now, if I reduce the opacity of this one, you can see that all of these layers, so the chameleon and both caterpillars, because all are linked together at opacity and visibility level, you can see that all of these 3 layers are affected at the same time. Now, this is a very cool feature, and there definitely are tons of ways how we can use this when compositing or when editing photos. So this is basically just a quick overview of how these linked layers work and how we can apply these. Alright, so the next feature that I want to highlight in this video is the live Liquify filter. So usually what we would have done if we used the Liquify tool, we would have worked destructively. So let me show you. I have this picture opened and I already rasterized it because we cannot work on image layers. So I have turned it into a pixel layer, and once I go to the Liquify tool, which is right over here, I can apply my changes so however I like. Let's say I want this eyes to move something like this because I don't know, for funny reasons, and then hit apply. This is a destructive way of using the Liquify tool. So I basically can only undo, which is Command C of course, but I can only undo and redo this task. But now I actually have applied this Liquify transformation on my pixel layer, so I can never get back my normal fox again later in the project. Now let me press Command Z and let me show you how the Liquify live filter actually works. So with the fox layer selected, I can go up to my menu bar and click on layer. I can go to new live filter layer and go to distort. And there we have Liquify. So if I click on this, Affinity Photo will jump right into the Liquify persona. So now I can do the same thing. I can just basically drag around whatever I want and make my adjustments. And once I hit done, you can see that Affinity Photo added a new layer, which is in this case a Liquify live filter layer. Now what this layer means is that we didn't apply our changes onto the pixel layer itself, but we rather applied our changes and adjustments on a separate Liquify layer. So we can actually turn this layer on and off, and now we can see the before and the after. Now there's one more cool thing about this whole non-destructive Liquify thing, and that is that this Liquify layer also has an inbuilt mask. So if I go to my brushes, I select any brushes and press B on the keyboard, you can see that once I brush over with black, you can see that the effect is actually masked out from this specific area. So now we can actually target very specific areas by using the layer mask of our Liquify filter. This is an amazing feature because beforehand we had to make our Liquify transformation perfectly because we were working destructive. So we had only one chance to do it correctly, and of course we could adjust it a little bit afterwards. But everything was destructive, and now we can just work non-destructive, so we can return into our Liquify persona. If I double click right over here, I can apply my changes, I can do something else, I can hit done again, and now you can see that we have applied our different changes. Alright, so the next feature that Affinity Photo added in version 1.9 is a whole new layer type, which is called a pattern layer. Now with pattern layers we can very easily create customized patterns to fill up our whole canvas. So let me show you how this works. So I've got a blank canvas right over here, and I can go up to layer, and there we find some new features, which are the new pattern layer and new pattern layer from selection, and I'll get back to the second one. So let's click on the first one, and Affinity Photo asks us for a certain dimension or a certain size. So maybe we can create something from 100 pixels by 100 pixels and press OK. Now it looks like nothing has happened except in the layers panel, because now we see a pattern layer. So once I click on this layer and reduce my brush size, obviously you can see that, where is it? There's my little square, and if I zoom in you can see that I have my square right there and my cursor is right inside of the square, and you can already see what's happening with everything, let's say. So I can click once right over here, and now if I zoom out you can see that I have a very nice symmetric pattern created already. Now this is of course by using a simple brush, so I'm using a soft round brush. Of course when I change the hardness or change the brush, this will also change the pattern like this. And We can also of course use different kinds of brushes. So now I'm using the soft round brush and the harder round brush, but of course if I press Command C twice and let's go to maybe my cloud brushes and select one of my cloud brushes and make it a lot smaller, I can make a very simple cloud pattern by simply clicking twice right here. Maybe use another cloud, whoops, decrease the brush size a whole lot and click right over here. So there we have our very cool pattern actually, and this was very easy to create. Now the next thing that we can do is when we select the move tool, so I press V on the keyboard to select the move tool, you see that this box appears. So what I can do right now is I can increase and decrease the size of my pattern, so I can go as crazy as I want. I can increase it a whole lot. Of course I can also rotate it however I like, and you can see that the whole pattern is just moving along with it. I can even shear it, so if I hold my cursor on the outside of my box, let's say, you can see these two arrows that are pointing in the opposite direction, and if I click and hold right now, you can see that I can even shear this whole pattern if I wanted to. Now as you can see, it is very easy to create seamless patterns, but we can also create a different kind of thing. So let me select my engraving brushes and let's just select the fourth brush and press B on the keyboard and just draw something. So you can see I've got this one right over here, maybe draw this one, and there we have our very cool pattern. Now what we can do with this pattern is we can also of course apply it only to the inside of a certain shape. So if I press U on the keyboard, I will select my shape tool and let me drag a square right over here. And let's say I want this pattern to be only visible inside of my shape. Now what I would do is I simply click my pattern and I'm gonna clip it to my rectangle, and right now you can see that I have clipped it to the rectangle only, so it disappeared from everywhere else. Now if I would grab my move tool by pressing V and I would move this thing around, you can see that the pattern is actually stuck to the background, and that is because at the top of my context toolbar I have lock children on. So this kind of sounds funny to me, but if you don't lock the child layers, which is this pattern layer in this case, if you don't lock it, you can see that it will move along with my shape. If I lock children, you can see that the pattern in the background is stuck to its place, and we can move this square or this rectangle in this case wherever we like. Alright, so the next feature that I want to discuss with you is the new blend mode, which is called Divide. Now what this does, it basically allows us to remove color cast in a very simple way. Now let me show you that in this example. We see this image of a beautiful woman right over here, and if I zoom in a little bit, you can see, or it's pretty hard to see maybe, but it is not perfectly white, and of course her clothes are supposed to be white. So how can we use this blend mode? We want to create a new fill layer, so we go up to our layers panel and click on new fill layer, and we want to hide it temporarily for now. So let me zoom out a little bit. And what we want to do now is we want to sample a color from somewhere that is supposed to be pure white. So let's zoom in a little bit right over here, and I guess this is supposed to be white. So let me grab my color picker right over here and let's sample a color from, let's say, right over here, and let's zoom out. Now if I show my fill layer and I click on this little thing, you can see that now we have loaded this color as a fill layer. What I want to do now is I want to set the blend mode of this fill layer to Divide, and there we go. You can see how easy it was to remove this color cast. So let me show you the before. This was the before and this is the after. Alright, so the next feature that I want to highlight to you is the text on path feature. Now, this is a very cool feature actually, and I will show you how this works. So we can start off by creating a curve with the pen tool. So I press P on the keyboard to select my pen tool, and I'm simply gonna drag some weird kind of curve just to show you how this thing works. Alright, so there we have our curve, and in the layers panel you can see that it actually is a curve. However, if I choose my artistic text tool right now, I can also select it by pressing T on the keyboard or by clicking this little A in the tools panel. And once I hover my cursor close to the curve, you can see that the cursor actually changes to this little T with this little curve next to it. And this means that once we click right now, that everything that we will type will go along this curved line. So if I type now curved line, awesome, you can see that we actually created this text around this curve. So let me reduce the size a little bit, and there we go. Now you just saw what happened if we pause this line. So if we go all the way to the end, and this is the starting point which I can move right now. So this green thing over here is the starting point. This yellow one is the ending point or the end point. So if we cross the end, the text will basically just appear on the other side of this line. And now we have a new starting point, which is this green one right over here, and a new end point as well. So basically for both sides of the curve, you have a starting point and an end point. So you can decide exactly where you want the text to be. Now, another thing that you can do is change the baseline of your text. So you can basically decide how far from the curve you want it to be. So if I select my awesome right over here and I go to my context toolbar and I increase the baseline, you can see that it goes below the line. And if I decrease the baseline, you can see that it moves up from the line. So this way we can decide exactly where we want our text to be appearing. All right, now let me delete this one for now. And let me show you the next thing that we can do with this text on pathing. So it doesn't only work on curves, it also works for shapes, and shapes basically are also curves. So let me select my circle tool right over here, and let's actually create a circle. So I'm simply gonna click and drag while holding shift, and when I hold spacebar you can see that I can move my whole curve around. So I'm just gonna align it as well as I can with the football, and this looks pretty good to me. So let's resize it a little bit, and there we have our circle. Now in the layers panel you can see that this is currently an ellipse shape. However, if I press T on the keyboard and I click on the curve once again, let me click here, let's say right over here, you can see that it turned into a shape path text once again. Now you see that sometimes when you click it will appear on the inside of the shape, and sometimes it will appear on the outside of the shape. However, in the context toolbar you find this little arrow, and if you click on this one, so let me type something, type text. So if I click on this little arrow icon, basically what it will do is switch the start point and the ending point. So this basically just puts everything on the outside. So once I drag this over right now, you will see that our text appeared on the outside of our football, let's say. So let me actually create this white. So this is very cool, very creative for graphic design and this kind of stuff. Cool feature, so let's move on to the next one. Alright, so the next cool feature that Affinity Photo 1.9 offers is that we can actually save our workspaces or our studio. Now, you can see that I've customized mine a little bit, and that is because it just works best for me and my workflow. So up at the top here I have my navigator, my color, my swatches, etc, etc. In the middle I have my layers and the channels, and at the bottom I have brushes and the history panel and the snapshots panel, etc. Now this is not the default panel, but what I can do right now, if I like this panel, I can actually save this. So let's say maybe I move my navigator to the left side, and I move my color panel, let's say also to the left side, and I'm gonna move it right over here. You can see that now my panel or not my screen looks whole different. So what I can do now is go up to view, go to studio presets, and let's click on add preset, and let's name this one messed up because I kind of messed mine up, and press enter. So now this whole studio is saved. Now let's say I move everything back once again, so where it actually was, and this is what I'm used to. But let's say I want to go back to my preset, so all I would have to do is go to view, go to studio presets, and click on messed up, and in one click you actually loaded back the workspace that you just saved. So this is very useful if you're doing several things. So maybe sometimes you're doing more graphic design, the other time you're doing color grading, the other time you're doing whatever. So for each, let's say, separate task, you can create different working spaces. Let's move on. Alright, so the next feature that I want to show you is how to create brush stamps. Now this is super easy and super fun, and in most cases or in many cases this can be very useful. So let me show you how this works. Now you can see I've got these two images right over here, one of this banana with lipstick on it and one of the moon. Now of course this banana is gonna be a fun one, so let's start with this one. I simply want to select the banana layer by clicking on the layer name. I'm gonna press W on the keyboard to select my selection brush tool, and I'm simply gonna brush over the banana to make a very quick but accurate selection. And of course this is very easy to select because we have a very distinct background. So once we've made a selection, what we want to do is make sure that our layer is a pixel layer. Now as you can see from my layers panel, this banana is already a pixel layer. So I've created a new brush category called sample, and all we have to do to create this into a brush stamp is simply click right over here and create a new brush from selection. And once we press this, you can see that we have added a banana stamp to our sample pack. So I'm gonna press Command D. I'm gonna press B to select the brush tool and maybe create a new layer on top of everything. And now you can see that very easy, I can just use this thing as a brush. I can paint with it. I can do whatever I want with it, what I can also do with a normal brush. Now, of course, I cannot really imagine myself using a banana too often in my photo manipulations. However, of course, a moon is a very useful item or object to use in a photo manipulation. So let's try to create a brush stamp from the moon as well. Now, I want to show you one extra feature that Affinity Photo has added, and that is a new feature with the ellipse marquee tool. So the ellipse marquee tool, we can find it right over here. And now there is this new feature that allows us to select from the center. So if I uncheck this, this is basically how it used to work. So I would have to guess where about I would have to start. So somewhere here in the corner, click and then drag around and then hope that it would align with my moon. However, if I check from center right here at the context toolbar, I basically have to figure out where the middle of my circle is, so somewhere around here. And now I can click and drag, and you can see that we can actually use this ellipse tool from the center. And I think this looks pretty fine to me. So once I release, I can basically just still move it around and position my ellipse or my selection. Alright, so I think this looks fine. So let's turn this into a brush right now. Now, remember what I said before, your layer has to be a pixel layer because this doesn't work on image layers, and let me show you how this looks. So I have an image layer selected right now. So once I go down here to my brush panel, you can see that the option new brush from selection is grayed out, and that is because we're working on an image layer. So first you want to right click and rasterize the layer. And then you want to click right over here and select new brush from selection, and there we go. So I'm gonna press Command D, I'm gonna create a new pixel layer and press B to select my brush tool, and there we have our moon stamp. And that's how easy and fun it is to create these stamps. Now of course, moons are very useful when compositing and when creating photo manipulation, so I advise you to create this moon stamp for yourself and just have a lot of fun with it. Alright, let me show you the next feature. The next feature that I want to highlight is that we can now use filters on layer masks. So I've got this cube right over here, this Rubik's cube, and I'm gonna make a selection with my pen tool. Now you can see that the edges are quite blurry right over here and everywhere, but I want to use my pen tool because it just gives the clearest result. So let me just make a very quick selection. I'm gonna press P on the keyboard to select my pen tool. And I'm just gonna trace around this cube, and I'm gonna create a very quick selection to show you what I mean with this. There we have our cube selection. Now, I want to turn this into a mask, so I'm going up to our context toolbar and I'm gonna click mask. And there we have our curved mask. Now you can see that if I zoom in, that these edges are super sharp and actually don't really match with the blurriness of our cube, let's say. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I blur the edges of my mask just a little bit so that my selection looks more natural. What I want to do is I want to select my curve layer. I'm gonna go up to filters, gonna go to blur, and then click on Gaussian blur. And now I can increase this blur. So you can see that once I increase this a little bit, something like this, now it actually looks a lot more natural than before. So before it looked like this, and afterwards it looks like this. Now of course we are having a white background, so if I would turn this background into any other color, let's say a black background, you can still see that we've got this white thingies going on, and that is because I didn't make the nicest selection. However, you can see actually that this edge fits a lot better with the subject than before. So that is the power of using filters on layer masks. And one thing that I noticed is once I use my pen tool to create a mask, I create a curve mask. But once I apply a filter to it, you can see that it turned it into a pixel layer mask. So I actually recorded this last night and I forgot to record the intros. Of course, this is this feels very funny because I just got my wisdom teeth up and down removed. So this part of my face is still very numb. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you like these new features. I'm very excited to play around with all of this. And I hope to see you in my next video. Ciao, ciao.